In the forgotten village of Blackthorn, Clara Grey inherits a crumbling house on Hollow Hill, a place whispered to be cursed. Trapped by its locked doors and glowing symbols, she uncovers a chilling truth. Her family's blood is tied to a shadow that feeds on lives, and she's the last to pay its price. As the house comes alive with whispers and moving shadows, Clara must face the figure that comes at midnight, demanding a choice: her life, or the curse that won't let her go. Chapter 1. The house on Hollow Hill. The wind howled like a dying animal as Clara stepped off the creaking bus onto the cracked pavement of Blackthorn village. Her boots sank into the muddy ground, and the cold bit her fingers through her thin gloves. She was 28, tired, and broke, with a backpack holding everything she owned: a few clothes, a cracked phone, and a letter from a lawyer she'd never met. The letter said she'd inherited a house from her great-uncle, Edmund Grey, a man she didn't remember. The address was 13 Hollow Hill, and the lawyer promised it was hers if she claimed it in person. Clara had nowhere else to go, so she came. Blackthorn village was a forgotten speck in the English countryside, surrounded by twisted trees and fields that smelled of rot. The bus driver, a hunched man with yellow teeth, had stared at her when she mentioned the address. "You sure you want that place?" he'd asked, his voice low, like he was afraid someone might hear. Clara nodded, ignoring the knot in her stomach. She needed a roof over her head, not ghost stories. The path to Hollow Hill was steep, lined with gnarled oaks that leaned over like they were watching her. The air grew heavier with every step, thick with the scent of damp earth and something sour, like spoiled milk. By the time she reached the top, her legs burned, and her breath came in short gasps. The house loomed ahead, a crumbling giant of stone and wood, its windows dark like empty eyes. Ivy choked the walls, and the roof sagged under missing tiles. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a place where things went to die. Clara pushed the rusted gate open, its screech echoing in the silence. The front door was heavy oak, carved with strange symbols she didn't recognize: whorls and jagged lines that seemed to shift when she blinked. The key from the lawyer's letter fit the lock, but it took her whole weight to turn it. The door groaned open, and a wave of cold air hit her, smelling of dust and something sharp, like old blood. Inside, the house was a maze of shadows. The foyer had a high ceiling with a chandelier draped in cobwebs, its crystals dull and lifeless. The floorboards creaked under her feet, and every step kicked up dust that danced in the weak light filtering through cracked windows. A grand staircase curved upward into darkness, and doors lined the walls, each one closed like they were hiding something. Clara's heart pounded, but she told herself it was just nerves. Old houses were creepy. That's all. She dropped her backpack by the door and pulled out her phone, using its flashlight to explore. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing faded wallpaper peeling like skin and furniture covered in dusty sheets. A portrait hung above the fireplace: a man with sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed to follow her. His face was pale, almost grey, and his lips were set in a thin line, like he knew something she didn't. A brass plate beneath the painting read Edmund Grey, 1892. Her uncle. Clara shivered and turned away. The kitchen was at the back, its tiles cracked and stained. A rusted sink sat under a window that looked out onto a yard overgrown with weeds. Clara tried the faucet, but it only coughed up brown water that smelled like metal. She found a cupboard with a few cans of beans and a box of stale crackers, enough to keep her from starving for a couple of days. She ate a handful of crackers, the dry crumbs sticking to her throat, and decided to find a bedroom. She wasn't picky. Anything with a bed would do. Upstairs, the air was thicker, like it hadn't been breathed in years. The hallway stretched on, lined with more closed doors. Clara picked one at random and pushed it open. The room was small, with a single bed, a warped dresser, and a mirror clouded with age. The bed's mattress was thin, but it was better than the floor. She set her backpack down and sat on the edge, the springs squeaking under her weight. For a moment, she felt okay. This was her house now. She could make it work. Then she heard a low, scraping sound, like nails dragging across wood. It came from the wall behind the bed. Clara froze, her breath caught in her chest. The sound stopped, then started again, slower, deliberate. She stood and pressed her ear to the wall. It was cold against her skin, and the scraping was louder now, like something was trying to claw its way out. She backed away, her phone shaking in her hand as the flashlight beam danced across the room. "Hello," she called, her voice small in the vast house. No answer, just the echo of her own words. The scraping stopped, and the silence was worse. It felt heavy, like the house was holding its breath. Clara grabbed her backpack and moved to another room, this one with 2 windows that let in a sliver of moonlight. The scraping didn't follow her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. She locked the door and pushed the dresser against it, her hands trembling. Sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the house made her jump, and the shadows seemed to move in the corners of her vision. She kept her phone's flashlight on, draining the battery, but she didn't care. The dark was too thick, too alive. Around midnight, she heard footsteps, heavy, uneven, like someone dragging their feet. They came from the hallway, slow and deliberate, stopping just outside her door. Clara held her breath, waiting for a knock, a voice, anything. Nothing came. The footsteps retreated, fading into the house's endless creaks and groans. By morning, Clara was exhausted, but determined. She wasn't going to let an old house scare her off. She explored more, finding a library with shelves of moldy books and a dining room with a table set for a meal that never happened. Every room felt wrong, like it was waiting for something. In the basement, she found a locked door, its handle cold and slick, with something she didn't want to think about. The lawyer's letter hadn't mentioned a basement, and she didn't have a key. She decided to leave it alone. As the day went on, Clara tried to make the house feel like hers. She opened windows to let in fresh air, swept dust from the floors, and moved her things into the second bedroom. But the house fought back. The windows wouldn't stay open, slamming shut with no wind. The dust seemed to settle faster than she could sweep it. And the shadows, they were too dark, too solid, pooling in corners like spilled ink. By evening, she was ready to call the lawyer and sell the place. But her phone had no signal, and the landline in the foyer was dead. That night, the scraping came again, louder, closer. It wasn't just in the walls, now it was in the ceiling, under the floor, everywhere. Clara sat on the bed, clutching a kitchen knife she'd found, her eyes locked on the door. The dresser was still pushed against it, but it didn't feel like enough. The scraping turned into a low hum, like a voice too deep to understand. It vibrated in her chest, making her teeth ache. She wanted to scream, to run, but where would she go? The village was miles away, and the bus wouldn't come again for days. Then she saw it, a shadow on the wall, tall and thin, with arms too long for any human. It moved when she didn't, sliding across the wallpaper like it had a life of its own. Clara's flashlight flickered, and the shadow grew sharper, its edges jagged like broken glass. She swung the knife at it, but it was just a shadow, untouchable. The hum grew louder, and the shadow leaned closer, its head tilting like it was studying her. Clara screamed, and the shadow vanished, the hum cutting off like a snapped string. She didn't sleep that night. She sat with her back to the wall, the knife in her lap, watching the shadows for any sign of movement. When dawn broke, the house was quiet again, but Clara knew it wasn't empty. Something lived here, something older than the house, older than her great uncle, older than the village, and it wasn't going to let her leave. Clara decided to find answers. The lawyer's letter mentioned a diary Edmund kept, hidden somewhere in the house. If she could find it, maybe it would explain what was happening. She started in the library, pulling books from shelves, checking for hidden compartments. The air grew colder as she worked, and the shadows seemed to follow her, stretching longer than they should. By noon, she found it, a leather-bound book tucked behind a loose panel in the fireplace. Its pages were yellowed, the ink faded but readable. The first entry was dated 1890. "My name is Edmund Grey," it began, "and I fear I have made a terrible mistake." Clara read until the light faded, each word pulling her deeper into her great-uncle's nightmare. He wrote of a deal he made, a promise to something he called the shadow. It wasn't a person or a thing, but something else, something that lived in the house before it was built. Edmund thought he could control it, use it to gain power, wealth, anything he wanted. But the shadow had its own plans. It wanted a body, a life, and Edmund was its way in. The diary ended abruptly, the last page smeared with what looked like blood. Clara closed it, her hands shaking. The house was silent, but she felt it listening. The shadow wasn't gone, it was still here, and now it knew her name. She didn't know what to do, but she knew she couldn't stay. She grabbed the diary and her backpack, heading for the front door. The air grew thick, like she was walking through water. The symbols on the door glowed faintly, and when she touched the handle, it burned her hand. She yanked it back, cursing, and saw the shadow again, taller now, filling the foyer. Its eyes were two white sparks, and its mouth opened. a black void that swallowed the light. Clara ran upstairs, barricading herself in the bedroom. The house was alive, and it wanted her. She clutched the diary, hoping it held a way out. Outside, the wind howled, and the shadows danced, waiting for the night to come. Chapter 2. Whispers in the walls. Clara sat on the floor of the bedroom, her back pressed against the cold wall, the kitchen knife gripped tightly in her hand. The diary lay open in her lap, its pages yellowed and brittle, Edmund Grey's words, staring up at her like a warning. Her heart pounded so hard, she thought it might crack her ribs. The shadow she'd seen in the foyer, the one with those awful glowing eyes, was gone, but she could still feel it, like a weight in the air. The house was too quiet now, the kind of quiet that made every creak sound like a scream. She hadn't slept in over a day, and her eyes burned from staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. The dresser was still pushed against it, but she didn't trust it to hold the symbols on the front door. The ones that burned her hand were etched in her mind, swirling lines that didn't look like any language she knew. She wanted to believe this was all in her head, that she was just tired and scared, but the diary told a different story. Edmund had known something was wrong with this house, and now she was trapped in it. The morning light crept through the windows, grey and weak, like it was afraid to touch the house. Clara forced herself to stand, her legs shaky. She needed answers, and the diary was her only lead. She flipped through its pages again, skimming Edmund's cramped handwriting. He wrote about the house like it was alive, like it had a mind of its own. "The shadow speaks to me," one entry said. "It knows my name, my fears, my sins. It promises power, but its price is too high." Clara's stomach twisted. What had Edmund done? She decided to search the house again, hoping to find something, anything that could explain what was happening. She tucked the diary into her backpack and moved the dresser, wincing as it scraped the floor. The hallway was dim, the air heavy with dust, and that same sour smell, like something rotting just out of sight. She kept the knife in one hand, her phone in the other, its flashlight flickering as the battery dwindled. The house seemed bigger today, the hallways longer, the doors more numerous. It was like the house was changing, stretching itself to keep her lost. Clara started in the library, where she'd found the diary. The shelves towered over her, filled with books that smelled of mold and time. She ran her fingers along the spines, looking for anything that stood out. Most of the titles were in languages she didn't understand, Latin maybe, or something older. One book, bound in black leather with no title, felt cold to the touch, like it had been sitting in a freezer. She pulled it out and opened it, but the pages were blank, except for faint reddish stains that looked too much like blood. She slammed it shut and shoved it back on the shelf, her hands trembling. As she moved deeper into the house, the whispers started. They were faint at first, like leaves brushing against a window, but they grew louder, clearer, words she couldn't quite catch, spoken in a voice that wasn't human. It came from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, surrounding her. "Clara," it hissed, her name drawn out like a snake's slither. She spun around, the knife raised, but there was nothing, just shadows that seemed to pulse in the corners. "Who's there?" she shouted, her voice breaking. The whispers stopped, but the silence was worse. It felt like the house was waiting, watching. She found herself in a hallway she didn't remember, narrower than the others, with walls that seemed to lean inward. At the end was a door, smaller than the rest, its wood warped and stained. It wasn't locked, but the handle was. So cold it stung her fingers. She pushed it open, and a wave of damp air hit her, smelling of earth and decay. The room was tiny, barely big enough for the single chair in the center. The walls were bare except for a single word scratched into the plaster: "Run." Clara's breath caught in her throat. The word looked fresh, the edges sharp, like someone had carved it just for her. She backed out, slamming the door shut, and ran back to the foyer. Her phone's flashlight died, plunging her into darkness. She fumbled for the light switch, but it didn't work. The house was playing with her, cutting her off from the world. She sank to the floor, clutching the knife, and tried to think. The diary. She needed to keep reading. Maybe Edmund had left a way out, a way to stop whatever this was. She pulled out the diary and opened it to where she'd left off. Edmund's writing grew messier, more frantic. "The shadow is not one thing," he wrote. "It is many, a hunger that never stops. I thought I could bind it, but it binds me. It lives in the walls, in the shadows, in the very stones of this house. It wants more than my life. It wants my soul." Clara's hands shook as she read. Edmund had tried to fight it, to lock it away, but he'd failed. The last entry was a single line. The cellar holds the truth, but I cannot face it. The cellar. Clara remembered the locked door in the basement, the one that felt wrong. She didn't want to go down there, but what choice did she have? The whispers started again, louder now, chanting her name like a prayer. She stood, her legs weak, and made her way to the basement stairs. The air grew colder with every step, the darkness thicker. The knife felt useless in her hand, but she held it anyway. The basement was a labyrinth of stone walls and dirt floors, lit only by a single bulb that flickered like it was about to die. The locked door was at the far end, its surface covered in the same symbols as the front door. Clara touched it, and the symbols glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. She didn't have a key, but she didn't need one. The door creaked open on its own, revealing a staircase that descended into blackness. Just she took a step, then another, her flashlight beam swallowed by the dark. The whispers were louder here, a chorus of voices that seemed to come from inside her head. Clara, they said. Stay, feed us. She wanted to turn back, but her feet kept moving, like the house was pulling her down. At the bottom was a room, its walls carved with symbols that glowed red in the dark. In the center was a stone altar, stained with something dark and sticky. Above it, the shadow waited taller than before, its eyes like burning coals, its mouth a gaping void. Clara screamed, dropping the knife. The shadow didn't move, but she felt it reach into her, cold fingers wrapping around her thoughts. It showed her things. Edmund, his face twisted in terror as he carved symbols into the walls. A family, long dead, their blood soaking the floor. And Clara herself, standing in this room, her eyes empty, her body not her own. She stumbled back, tripping over the stairs, and ran, the whispers chasing her. She didn't stop until she was back in the bedroom, the door locked, the dresser in place. The diary was still in her backpack, and she clung to it like a lifeline. The house was alive, and it wanted her. But she wasn't Edmund. She wouldn't give in. She opened the diary again, searching for anything that could help. One page mentioned Abigail, Edmund's sister. She'd lived in the village, and she'd known about the shadow. Maybe she'd left something behind, something Clara could use. Clara decided to go to the village. It was her only hope. She waited until dawn, when the house felt less alive, and slipped out the front door. The symbols didn't burn her this time, but she felt their eyes on her, watching. The path to Blackthorn was long, and the trees seemed to whisper as she passed. By the time she reached the village, her legs were shaking, and her breath came in gasps. The village was quiet, its streets empty except for a few old men who stared at her like she was a ghost. She found a small library, its windows fogged with age, and asked the librarian about Abigail Grey. The woman, old and frail, flinched at the name. "You're from the house on Hollow Hill," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You should leave, now." Clara pressed her, and the woman finally pointed her to a box of old records in the back. The records told a grim story. Abigail had tried to save Edmund, to break the shadow's hold on him. She'd found a ritual, something to trap it, but it hadn't worked. The last record was a death notice. Abigail found dead in her home, her body covered in strange marks. Clara's hope faded. If Abigail couldn't stop it, what chance did she have? She returned to the house as the sun set, the diary clutched to her chest. The whispers were waiting for her, louder now, hungrier. She locked herself in the bedroom and read the diary again, searching for the ritual Abigail had tried. It was there, in the final pages, a list of symbols, words to speak, and a warning: the shadow cannot be destroyed, only bound. But the binding requires a price. Clara didn't know what the price was, but she knew she had to try. As night fell, the house came alive. The whispers turned to screams, and the shadows moved, crawling across the walls like spiders. Clara held the diary and began to draw the symbols, her hands shaking. She didn't know if she could do this, but she had to try. The shadow was coming, and it wouldn't wait. Chapter 3. The locked room. Clara's hands shook as she traced the symbols from Edmund's diary onto the bedroom floor, using a piece of chalk she'd found in a drawer. The air was thick, pressing down on her like a heavy blanket, and the whispers had grown into a low, constant hum that buzzed in her skull. The symbols were strange loops and sharp angles that didn't look like any writing she'd ever seen. Each one made her fingers tingle, like touching a live wire, but she kept going. The diary said these symbols could bind the shadow, trap it somehow, and Clara was desperate enough to believe it. The house on Hollow Hill felt more alive than ever. The walls creaked, not like old wood settling, but like something breathing, slow and deep. The shadows in the corners pulsed, stretching toward her like fingers. She didn't look at them. She couldn't. Her eyes stayed on the diary, on the instructions Abigail had left, the ones that hadn't saved her. Draw the circle first, the diary said. Then the symbols, in order. Speak the words when the moon is high. Clara glanced at the window. The moon was a thin sliver, barely visible through the clouds, but it would have to do. She finished the circle, a wobbly ring of chalk around her. The symbols came next, each one more complex than the last. Her hand cramped, but she didn't stop. The hum grew louder, vibrating in her chest, and the air turned cold, so cold her breath came out in white puffs. She whispered the words from the diary, old words that felt heavy on her tongue, like they didn't belong in her mouth. Vinculum, umbri, tenebris, carere, bind the shadow, banish the dark. She didn't know what they meant, but they made the hum falter, just for a second. Then the house fought back. The floorboards groaned, splitting under her feet, and the chalk circle cracked like glass. The whispers turned into a scream, a sound that clawed at her ears, and the shadows surged forward, swallowing the moonlight. Clara dropped the diary, her hands flying to her ears. But the scream was inside her head now, tearing through her thoughts. She saw flashes: Edmund on his knees, his face twisted in pain. Abigail, her eyes wide with terror. And something else, something black and endless, with eyes like burning stars. It was the shadow, and it was angry. Clara stumbled back, tripping over the bed. The knife she'd been carrying was gone, lost in the chaos. She scrambled for the diary, clutching it like a shield, and ran for the door. The dresser was still, pushed against it, but it didn't matter. The door flew open on its own, slamming against the wall with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. She ran into the hallway, the shadows chasing her, their edges sharp and jagged. The house was a maze now, the hallways twisting in ways that didn't make sense, doors appearing where walls should be. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to keep moving. The whispers followed, chanting her name, and the air grew so cold it burned her skin. She turned a corner and stopped dead. At the end of the hallway was a door she hadn't seen before, heavy and black, with no handle, just a keyhole. The symbols from the diary were carved into it, glowing, faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. This was the locked room, the one Edmund mentioned in his diary, the one he said held the truth. Clara didn't have a key, but she didn't need one. The door creaked open, just an inch, and a wave of cold air hit her, smelling of earth and blood. She hesitated, her heart pounding, but the shadows were behind her, closing in. She had no choice. She slipped through the gap, and the door slammed shut behind her. The sound final, like a coffin lid. The room was small, barely bigger than a closet, with stone walls that glistened with moisture. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of decay, and the only light came from the symbols on the walls, glowing red like embers. In the center was a wooden chair, its legs warped and stained, and on it sat a box, small and black, with the same symbols carved into its surface. Clara's stomach twisted. She didn't want to touch it, but she knew she had to. The diary said the truth was here, and she needed to know what she was fighting. She approached the box, her footsteps echoing in the tiny room. The whispers were quieter now, but they hadn't stopped. They were waiting, watching. She reached for the box, and the symbols flared brighter, burning her eyes. Her fingers brushed the wood, and it was cold, so cold it felt like it was sucking the warmth from her body. She lifted the lid, and inside was a single object, a key, old and rusted, with a handle shaped like a skull dot. As soon as she touched it, the room changed. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing thicker, heavier. The whispers turned into voices, clear and sharp, speaking words she couldn't understand. She saw things, flashes of Edmund, his hands covered in blood, carving symbols into the floor, Abigail, screaming as shadows swallowed her, and Clara herself, standing in this room, her eyes glowing white, her body moving like a puppet. She dropped the key, and the visions stopped. But the voices didn't. They were louder now, inside her, telling her to stay, to give in. Clara backed away, her hands shaking. The key lay on the floor, glinting in the red light. She didn't want to take it, but she knew she couldn't leave it. She grabbed it, shoving it into her pocket, and ran for the door. It wouldn't open. She pounded on it, her fists aching, but it didn't budge. The shadows were in the room now, pooling around her feet, climbing the walls. They weren't just shadows anymore, they had shape, form, arms that reached for her, fingers that brushed her skin like ice. She screamed, and the door finally gave way, spilling her into the hallway. She ran, not caring where, just away from that room, that box, that key. The house was alive, its walls pulsing, its shadows moving. She found herself back in the foyer, the front door in sight, but the symbols on it glowed brighter now, burning her eyes. She tried the handle, and it burned her hand again, worse this time, leaving a red mark that throbbed like a heartbeat. Clara stumbled upstairs, back to the bedroom, and barricaded the door again. She sat on the bed, the diary in her lap, the key heavy in her pocket. The house was quiet now, but it wasn't empty. The shadow was here, and it knew she'd found the key. She didn't know what it unlocked, but she knew it was important. The diary mentioned a ritual, a way to bind the shadow, but it needed something, a sacrifice, a price. Edmund hadn't said what, but Clara had a sick feeling she was about to find out. She opened the diary again, her hands trembling. The pages were different now, the words shifting, rearranging themselves. New entries appeared, ones she hadn't seen before. The key opens the cellar, one said, but the cellar is a trap. The shadow waits there, hungry. Clara's heart sank. She'd been to the cellar, seen the locked door, felt its wrongness. She didn't want to go back, but the diary was clear. The answers were there. And so was the shadow. She spent the rest of the day reading, searching for anything that could help. The diary mentioned Abigail again, her attempt to bind the shadow, her failure. There was a drawing to a map of the house, with the cellar marked in red. It showed a hidden room, one Clara hadn't found, behind the locked door. That's where the ritual had to happen, where the shadow could be trapped. But the diary warned of a cost, something Edmund refused to pay, something Abigail tried and died for. As night fell, the house came alive again. The whispers returned, louder, hungrier, chanting her name. The shadows moved, crawling across the walls, forming shapes, faces, hands, eyes. Clara clutched the key, its skull-shaped handle biting into her palm. She didn't know if she could do this, but she knew she couldn't run. The house wouldn't let her. She had to face the cellar, the shadow, the truth. She waited until midnight, when the moon was high, and gathered her courage. The diary, the key, the chalk, she took them all and headed for the basement. The stairs creaked under her feet, each step heavier than the last. The air grew colder, thicker, and the whispers turned into a roar, a sound that shook the walls. She reached the locked door, the symbols glowing brighter now, pulsing with a life of their own. She held up the key, and the door clicked open, revealing the darkness beyond. Clara took a deep breath and stepped inside, the shadows closing around her like a fist. Chapter 4. Shadows that moved. Clara's breath fogged in the icy air as she descended the cellar stairs, the skull-shaped key biting into her palm. The symbols on the door behind her pulsed like a dying heart, their red glow fading as the darkness swallowed her. The diary was tucked under her arm, its pages heavy with Edmund's warnings, and the chalk rattled in her pocket. The whispers were everywhere now, a chorus of voices that clawed at her mind, chanting her name in a rhythm that matched her racing pulse. The house on Hollow Hill was alive, and it wanted her to know it. The cellar was a void, the kind of dark that felt solid, like it could press you into nothing. Her phone was dead, its battery drained by the house's endless hunger, so she relied on the faint glow of the symbols carved into the walls. They lit her path, but not enough to see more than a few feet ahead. The air smelled of wet stone and something sharper, like blood left to dry. Each step echoed, too loud, like the house was mocking her. At the bottom, the staircase opened into a wide chamber, its walls rough and slick with moisture. The symbols were everywhere, on the floor, the ceiling, the walls glowing just enough to show the shape of things. A stone altar in the center, stained black with something that wasn't water. Chains bolted to the floor, rusted but strong. And shadows, too many shadows, moving when they shouldn't. Clara froze, her eyes darting to the corners. The shadows weren't just dark patches, they had edges, shapes, like people standing just out of sight. When she moved, they moved, sliding across the walls like oil. "Stay away," she whispered, her voice trembling. The shadows didn't listen. They crept closer, their forms stretching, twisting into things that weren't human, arms too long, heads too wide, eyes that glowed like embers. The whispers grew louder, a jumble of words she couldn't catch, but one stood out: feed. Clara's stomach churned. She gripped the key tighter, its cold metal grounding her, and forced herself to focus. The diary said the ritual had to happen here, in this room, where the shadow was strongest. She knelt by the altar, her knees sinking into the damp earth. The diary's instructions were clear: draw the symbols in a circle, speak the words, offer something to bind the shadow. But what Edmund hadn't said, and Abigail's attempt had killed her. Clara opened the diary, her hands shaking as she traced the symbols onto the floor. The chalk scraped against the stone, leaving white lines that glowed faintly, like they were drinking the light from the walls. The shadows watched, their shapes growing sharper, more defined. She could feel their eyes burning into her, waiting for her to fail. The circle was almost complete when the air changed. It grew heavier, thicker, like she was breathing syrup. The whispers turned into a scream, a sound that ripped through her head, making her vision blur. The shadows moved faster now, circling her, their forms merging into one massive Shapper figure, taller than the room should allow, its head brushing the ceiling, its arms reaching for her. Clara's hands fumbled, the chalk slipping from her fingers, but she grabbed it and finished the circle, closing it with the jagged line. Vinculum umbri tenebris carere, she said, the words clumsy on her tongue. The scream stopped, and the shadows froze, their edges trembling like they were caught in a web. Clara's heart pounded, but she kept going, repeating the words, louder each time. The diary said the ritual needed a price, something to hold the shadow, but she didn't know what. Blood, a life, her own. She pushed the thought away and focused on the words, her voice echoing in the chamber. The shadows fought back. The circle glowed brighter, but the floor shook, cracks spreading like veins. The altar shuddered, and the chains rattled, as if something was pulling at them from below. Clara's voice cracked, but she didn't stop. The shadow loomed over her, its eyes like twin suns, its mouth a black void that sucked at the air. It spoke, not with words, but with a feeling, a hunger so deep it made her bones ache. It wanted her, not just her body, but everything she was. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the key, holding it up like a weapon. The shadow flinched, its form flickering, and the whispers faltered. Clara didn't know why, but the key was important. It scared the shadow, or at least made it pause. She kept chanting, her voice hoarse, and pressed the key to the center of the circle. The symbols flared, so bright she had to squint, and the shadow screamed, a sound that shook the walls. Dust rained from the ceiling, and the cracks in the floor widened, but the circle held. Then she saw it a crack in the altar, small but deep, shaped like the key's skull handle. Without thinking, she jammed the key into it, twisting until it clicked. The shadow roared, its form collapsing into itself, shrinking until it was just a black smear on the floor. The whispers stopped, and the air lightened, like the house had taken a breath. Clara fell to her knees, gasping, the diary slipping from her hands. She'd done it. The shadow was gone, or at least trapped, for now. But the house wasn't done. The walls groaned, and the symbols dimmed, their glow fading to nothing. The chains rattled again, louder, and Clara's stomach dropped. She grabbed the diary and the chalk, scrambling to her feet. The shadow might be bound, but something else was here, something the ritual hadn't touched. She ran for the stairs, the key still lodged in the altar. She didn't care, she just wanted out. The stairs seemed longer going up, each step harder than the last. The whispers were back, quieter but sharper, like knives in her ears. "You can't leave," they said. "You belong to us." Clara ignored them, her legs burning as she climbed. The cellar door was open, but the symbols on it glowed again, brighter, angrier. She burst through, slamming it shut behind her, and ran to the foyer. The front door was there, its symbols pulsing, but she didn't try it. She knew it wouldn't open. She collapsed on the floor, the diary clutched to her chest. The house was quiet again, but it was a trick. It was always a trick. She opened the diary, her hands shaking, and found a new page, one she hadn't seen before. It was written in Abigail's handwriting, not Edmund's, and it was addressed to her. "Clara," it began, "if you're reading this, you've found the key, you've tried the ritual, but it's not enough. The shadow is old, older than this house, older than time. It can't be destroyed, only held, and the price is always blood. Clara's heart sank. Blood. She thought of the stains on the altar, the chains, the box in the locked room. Edmund had tried to bind the shadow, and so had Abigail, but they'd both paid with their lives. She wasn't ready to die, but the house didn't care. It wanted her, and it wouldn't stop. She spent the rest of the night in the bedroom, the door barricaded, the diary open in her lap. The shadows were still there, lurking in the corners, but they didn't move. Not yet. She read Abigail's words again, searching for a way out. The diary mentioned a book, one Edmund had hidden in the library, a book of rituals older than the house. It was her only hope. If she could find it, maybe she could finish what Abigail started. At dawn, Clara forced herself to move. The house was quiet, but it was watching, waiting. She went to the library, her steps slow, her eyes scanning every shadow. The shelves loomed over her, their books heavy with dust and secrets. She searched for hours, pulling books, checking for hidden panels, anything that might hold the book Abigail mentioned. The whispers followed her, soft but persistent, like a child tugging at her sleeve. By noon, she found it, a thin, leather-bound book, tucked behind a row of encyclopedias, its cover plain except for a single symbol, the same one on the key. She opened it, and the pages were filled with writing, not in English, but in something older, with drawings of circles, symbols, and figures that looked too much like the shadow. One page had a note in Abigail's handwriting. This is the last chance. The ritual must be done at midnight, in the hidden room. But beware, the shadow will fight, and it will take everything. Clara closed the book, her hands cold. Midnight, the hidden room. She didn't know where it was, but the diary's map showed it. Behind the cellar door. She had to go back, face the shadow again, and this time, she might not come out. The house creaked around her, a low, mocking laugh, and the shadows stirred. Ready to move, she had until midnight to prepare, to find the hidden room, to face the truth. The shadow was waiting, and it was hungry. Chapter 5. The Diary of Edmund Grey. Clara clutched the thin, leather-bound book she'd found in the library, its single symbol burning under her fingertips. The house on Hollow Hill was silent, but it was the kind of silence that pressed against her ears, heavy and waiting. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to breathe, pulsing faintly with the house's heartbeat. Her backpack sat by her feet, stuffed with the diary, the chalk, and a rusty knife she'd found in the kitchen. The clock on the wall, its hands stuck at midnight, ticked once, then stopped, as if mocking her. She had until midnight to find the hidden room, to try the ritual from the book, to face the shadow. Her hands shook as she opened Edmund's diary again, hoping for answers. The diary's pages were worn, some tearing at the edges, and Edmund's handwriting grew wilder with each entry. Clara skimmed through what she'd already read: his deal with the shadow, his fear, his failure, but now she focused on the later pages, the ones written in a frantic scrawl, as if he'd been running out of time. "The shadow is not one," he wrote. "It is many, a hunger that lives in the dark. I thought I could use it, but it used me. It wants a body, a life, and I was too weak to refuse." Clara's throat tightened. Edmund had been desperate, just like her, and the shadow had taken him. She flipped to a page she hadn't noticed before, tucked between two stuck-together sheets. It was dated 1892, the year of Edmund's death. "Abigail knows," it read. "She found the book, the old one, in the library. She says it holds the true ritual, the one to bind the shadow for good. But it demands a price, blood, life, something. Dear, I cannot pay it. I've locked the book away, behind the false shelf. The shadow grows stronger every night, and I hear it in my dreams, calling my name." Clara's heart sank. The book in her hands, this was it, the one Edmund feared, the one Abigail died trying to use. The diary went on, describing the hidden room. "Behind the cellar door, beyond the altar, there's a wall that isn't a wall. Push the stone with the spiral, and it opens. The room is old, older than the house, built on something that should not be. The shadow was born there, and only there can it be bound." Clara's hands trembled as she read. The map in the diary showed the cellar, the altar, and a small square marked hidden room. She'd been so close last night, but the shadow had stopped her. It screamed, driving her back. She checked the time on her cracked phone, now useless except as a clock. It was just past noon. She had hours until midnight, but the house felt like it was closing in, the air growing thicker, the shadows darker. The whispers were back, soft and sly, slipping into her thoughts. "Clara," they said, "stay with us." She shook her head, trying to block them out, and focused on the book. Its pages were filled with symbols, more complex than the ones in the diary, and words in a language she couldn't read. But Abigail's notes were there, scribbled in the margins, a guide to the ritual. "Draw the circle twice," Abigail wrote. "Once for the body, once for the soul. Speak the words exactly. Offer the price willingly, or it will take more." Clara didn't know what more meant, but the thought made her skin crawl. She packed the book into her backpack and headed for the cellar, her steps slow, deliberate. The house fought her every move. The stairs creaked louder than before, and the air grew so cold her fingers ached. The shadows followed, sliding along. The walls, their shapes twisting into faces, Edmund, Abigail, others she didn't know, all with empty eyes. She gripped the knife, its blade dull but heavy, and kept going. The cellar door was open, its symbols glowing faintly, like they were waiting for her. The staircase stretched into the dark, longer than she remembered, and the smell of blood and earth was stronger now, choking her. She reached the chamber with the altar, its black stains gleaming in the dim light of the symbols. The chains on the floor rattled, though there was no wind, and the shadows were thicker, moving faster, circling her like wolves. Clara's heart pounded, but she forced herself to kneel by the altar. Pulling out the chalk and the book, she started drawing the circle, her hands steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. The symbols came next, each one more intricate, their lines burning her eyes as she copied them. The whispers grew louder, angrier, and the shadows closed in, their forms, sharper arms, claws, eyes that glowed like fire. Clara's voice shook as she began the words from the book, older and heavier than the ones in the diary. "Umbra, vincita, lux eterna," she said, her tongue stumbling over the sounds. "Bind the shadow, eternal light." The circle glowed, faint at first, then brighter. Pushing the shadows back, she finished the first circle and started the second, as Abigail's notes instructed. The shadows screamed, a sound that shook the walls, and the floor cracked dirt. Spilling through, Clara kept going, her voice louder, the words coming faster. The shadows surged, their forms merging into one massive shape, the shadow. Its eyes like burning coals, its mouth a void that swallowed the light. It reached for her, its fingers brushing her arm, cold as death. Clara screamed but didn't stop. Finishing the second circle and slamming the book shut, the shadow roared, its form flickering, and the circle flared. So bright it blinded her. She fell back, her hands scraping the dirt, and felt something shift. The air lightened, and the shadows retreated, their screams fading to whispers. Clara's chest heaved as she caught her breath. The ritual wasn't done. She still had to find the hidden room, finish the words, offer the price, but she'd bought herself time. The shadow was weaker, at least for now. Then she heard a low, grinding sound, like stone on stone. The wall behind the altar shuddered, and a crack appeared, revealing a narrow passage, the hidden room. Clara's stomach twisted. She didn't want to go in, but the diary and the book were clear. The ritual had to end there. She grabbed her backpack, the knife, and the chalk, and crawled through the crack, the stone scraping her shoulders. The hidden room was small, its walls rough and covered in symbols that glowed red, pulsing like a heartbeat. The air was thick, almost solid, and the smell of blood was overwhelming, making her gag. In the center was a stone table, not an altar but something older, its surface carved with the same symbols. Chains hung from the walls, their links stained with rust and something darker. Clara's legs shook, but she forced herself to move, setting the book and diary on the table. The whispers were back, louder, clearer. Speaking in voices she recognized: Edmund, Abigail, her own. "You can't win," they said. "You're ours." Clara ignored them, opening the book to the final page of the ritual. The words were there, but so was Abigail's warning. The price is blood. It must be given, not taken. Clara's hand went to the knife. She didn't want to think about what that meant, but the shadow was coming, its presence heavy in the room, its eyes watching from the dark. She drew the circle on the table, her hands shaking so badly the chalk snapped. She used the pieces, scraping the symbols into the stone, her fingers bleeding from the effort. The shadows moved again, crawling up the walls, forming shapes. Edmund, his throat torn open. Abigail, her eyes gone. And Clara, her body twisted, her face not her own. She screamed, the sound swallowed by the room, and kept going. chanting the words as the symbols glowed brighter. The shadow appeared, not as a shape but as a force, pressing against her, filling her mind with images, her life, her fears, her failures. It showed her alone, always alone, and promised to keep her, to make her part of it. Clara's voice faltered, but she held the knife, its blade catching the red light. Umbra vincata, she said, louder, stronger. The shadow screamed, and the room shook, the chains rattling like bones. She didn't know what the price was, but she knew it was close. The knife was heavy in her hand, and the shadows were closing in. She had to finish the ritual, find the hidden room's secret, and pay whatever the shadow demanded. The house was alive, and it was hungry, and Clara was running out of time. Chapter 6. The town's secret. Clara stood in the hidden room, the knife trembling in her blood-slicked hand, the symbols on the stone table glowing like embers. The air was so thick it clung to her skin, heavy with the stench of blood and earth. The shadow's presence pressed against her, not a shape now but a weight, a hunger that filled the room and her mind. The whispers were a storm, screaming her name, Edmund's, Abigail's, weaving their voices into a chorus of despair. "Give in," they hissed. "You're ours." Clara's legs shook, but she gripped the knife tighter, her eyes locked on the book's final ritual page. She wasn't done yet. The diary and the old book lay open on the table, their pages fluttering though no wind touched them. Abigail's warning burned in her mind. The price is blood. It must be given, not taken. Clara's fingers ached where the chalk had cut them, her blood smearing the symbols she'd drawn. The circle was complete, the words half-spoken, but the shadow was fighting. Its screams shaking the walls, making the chains rattle like teeth. She didn't know what the price meant, but the knife felt heavier, like it was waiting for her to decide. The symbols flared brighter, and the shadow's form flickered into view. Tall, too tall, its eyes like burning coals, its mouth a black void that seemed to pull at her soul. It didn't move, but it didn't need to. Its presence was enough, filling her with images of death. Edmund, his body broken on this table. Abigail, her face carved with symbols, and Clara, her own eyes glowing white, her body not her own. She screamed, the sound lost in the shadows, roar, and stabbed the knife into the table, the blade sinking into the stone like it was flesh. The room shook, dust falling from the ceiling, and the shadow recoiled, its form shrinking, its eyes dimming. The whispers faltered, and for a moment Clara thought she'd won. But the house laughed, a low, grinding sound that came from everywhere. The symbols dimmed, and the chains snapped tight, like something was pulling them from below. The ritual wasn't enough. The shadow was still here, and it wasn't bound. Clara grabbed the book and diary, stuffing them into her backpack, and ran for the crack in the wall. The passage was narrower now, the stones scraping her arms as she crawled. Through the cellar was darker, the symbols on the walls barely glowing, and the air was so cold her breath burned. She stumbled up the stairs, the whispers chasing her, softer but sharper, like needles in her ears. "You can't leave," they said. "You're part of us." She burst into the foyer, the front door glowing with its cursed symbols, but she didn't try it. She knew it wouldn't open. Instead, she sank to the floor, her back against the wall, and pulled out the diary. There had to be something she'd missed, some clue to finish the ritual. The pages were different now, the words shifting, new entries appearing in Abigail's handwriting. "The town knows," one said. "They've always known. The shadow isn't just in the house, it's in Blackthorn, in the people, in their silence. Find the truth in the village, or the shadow will take you." Clara's heart sank. The village, she'd been there, seen the old men's stares, the librarians. Fear, they knew something, and they'd hidden it. She had to go back, ask questions, find out what Abigail meant. The house was quiet now, but it was a trick, a pause before the next attack. She waited until dawn, when the shadows seemed weaker, and slipped out, the diary and book in her backpack, the knife in her pocket. The path to Blackthorn was muddy, the air thick with fog that clung to her clothes. The trees leaned closer, their branches like fingers brushing her hair. The village was silent when she arrived, its streets empty except for a stray dog that growled and ran. The library was her first stop, its windows dark, the door creaking as she pushed it open. The librarian, the same frail woman from before, stood behind the counter, her eyes wide when she saw Clara. "You're back," the woman whispered, her voice shaking. "You shouldn't be here." "I need answers," Clara said, her voice firm despite the fear gnawing at her. "About the house, the shadow, Abigail Grey. What does the town know?" The librarian flinched, her hands clutching the counter. "Leave it alone," she said. "You can't fight it. No one can." Clara slammed the diary on the counter, open to Abigail's note. She said, "The town knows. Tell me, or I'll keep digging until I find it." The woman's eyes darted to the door, like she expected something to burst in. "Fine," she said, her voice barely audible. "But not here. Follow me." She led Clara to a back room, its walls lined with dusty files and old photos. The air smelled of mildew and secrets. The librarian locked the door and pulled a box from a shelf. Its lid marked with a symbol Clara recognized from the house's spiral with jagged lines. Inside were papers, letters, and a journal, not Edmund's or Abigail's, but someone else's. Dated 1800s. The librarian's hands shook as she opened it. Blackthorn was built on something old. She said, something that was here before. The village, before the house. The people called it the shadow, but it's not a ghost or a demon. It's something else. It lives in the dark, in the spaces between. The Greys, your family, they made a deal with it, long ago. Power, wealth, in exchange for blood. Clara's stomach twisted. What kind of blood? The librarian looked away. A life, every generation. The Greys gave it someone, a child, a sibling, a stranger. It kept the shadow quiet, but it always came back, hungrier. Edmund tried to break the deal, lock it away, but he failed. Abigail tried to, and she died. The town knows because we've seen it. We've paid our own price, keeping silent, looking away. Clara's hands clenched into fists. "Why didn't you stop it?" "We tried," the librarian said, her voice breaking. "Long ago, we burned the house, but it came back. We buried the land, but it rose again. The shadow is part of Blackthorn, part of us. You can't fight it. You can only run." Clara shook her head. "I'm not running. Tell me how to stop it." The librarian hesitated, then pulled a letter from the box, written in Abigail's handwriting. "She left this," she said, "before she died. It's all we have." Clara took the letter, her hands trembling. It was short, the ink faded but clear. "The ritual in the hidden room is the only way," Abigail wrote. "But the price is a life, given willingly. I couldn't do it. I wasn't strong enough. If you're reading this, you're the last. The shadow will take you, or you'll take it. Choose." Clara's throat tightened. A life, given willingly. That's what the ritual demanded, what Edmund and Abigail couldn't pay. She folded the letter and tucked it into the diary. "Thank you," she said, her voice cold. The librarian didn't respond, just stared at her with pity. Clara left the library. The village's silence heavier now. The old men watched from their porches, their eyes dark, knowing. She felt their fear, their guilt, but she didn't care. The house was waiting, and so was the shadow. She walked back to Hollow Hill, the fog thicker, the trees whispering her name. The house loomed ahead, its windows like eyes, its door open just a crack, inviting her in. She went straight to the bedroom, barricading the door, and opened the diary and book again. Abigail's letter confirmed what she'd feared. The ritual needed a sacrifice, a life given, not taken. She thought of the knife, the blood on her hands, the shadow's hunger. She wasn't ready to die, but she wasn't ready to give in either. The book had one more page, one last ritual, marked with a warning, for the brave or the foolish. It described a way to weaken the shadow, to trap it long enough to escape, but it needed something, a piece of the house, a piece of the shadow itself. Clara didn't know what that meant, but she knew where to look. The hidden room, the altar, the chains, they were part of the shadow, part of its power. She had to go back, face it again, and find a way to take what it held. The house creaked around her, a low, mocking laugh, and the shadows stirred, ready to move. Midnight was coming, and Clara was running out of time. Chapter 7. Blood on the floorboards. Clara sat in the bedroom, the knife's cold handle pressed against her palm, the diary and old book open before her. The house on Hollow Hill was silent, but it was a liar's silence, heavy with the promise of screams. The shadows clung to the walls, their edges sharper, like blades waiting to cut. Abigail's letter lay beside the diary, its words burned into Clara's mind. A life, given willingly, to bind the shadow. She wasn't ready to die, but the house didn't care. It wanted her blood, and it was done waiting. The clock on the wall, still stuck at midnight, ticked once, a sharp sound that made her jump. It was evening now, the grey light fading through the cracked windows, and Clara knew she had to move. The hidden room in the cellar was her only chance, the place where the shadow was born, where it could be trapped. The book's final ritual promised a way to weaken it, to take a piece of its power, but it didn't say how. Clara's hands shook as she stuffed the diary, book, and chalk into her backpack. The knife went into her pocket, its weight a grim comfort dot. She pushed the dresser from the door, its scrape echoing in the quiet. The hallway was dark, the air thick with the smell of dust and rot. The whispers started as soon as she stepped out, soft at first, then louder, chanting her name in a voice that wasn't human. "Clara," they hissed, "give us your blood." She ignored them, her eyes fixed on the cellar door at the end of the foyer. The symbols on it glowed red, pulsing like a wound, and the air grew colder with every step. The cellar stairs creaked under her boots, each one a warning to turn back. The darkness was thicker now, swallowing the glow of the symbols on the walls. The smell of blood and earth hit her like a slap, and the whispers turned into a low hum, vibrating in her bones. She reached the chamber with the stone altar, its black stains gleaming in the faint light. The chains on the floor rattled, though nothing touched them, and the shadows moved, sliding across the walls like snakes. Clara's heart pounded as she approached the crack in the wall, the entrance to the hidden room. It was narrower than before, the stones jagged, scraping her skin as she crawled through. The hidden room was smaller than she remembered, its walls closing in, the symbols glowing brighter, angrier. The stone table stood in the center, its surface carved with spirals and lines that seemed to writhe. The chains hung from the walls, their links stained with something dark, and the air was so heavy Clara could barely breathe. She knelt by the table, pulling out the book and chalk. The ritual was her last hope, but it needed a piece of the shadow, something to weaken it. She didn't know what that meant, but the chains caught her eye, their stains too much like blood. Maybe they were part of it, part of the house's power. She started drawing the circle, her hands steady, despite the fear clawing at her chest. The symbols came next, each one burning her fingers as she traced them, her blood mixing with the chalk. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices, Edmund, Abigail, others she didn't know screaming at her to stop. The shadows moved faster, forming shapes, hands reaching, eyes glowing, mouths open in silent cries. Clara's voice shook as she began the ritual's words. Umbra frangita, sanguis donata, break the shadow, offer the blood. The circle glowed, faint at first, then brighter, pushing the shadows back. The room trembled, dust falling from the ceiling, and the chains rattled harder, like something was trying to break free. Then she saw it, a stain on the floorboards beneath the table, darker than the rest, shaped like a handprint. It wasn't there before, she was sure of it. She touched it, and the wood was warm, sticky, like fresh blood. The whispers screamed, and the shadows surged, their forms merging into the shadow itself, towering over her, its eyes like fire, its mouth a void. It didn't speak, but she felt its hunger, its rage, pulling at her like a tide. Clara grabbed the knife, her hands slick with sweat and blood. The book said the ritual needed a piece of the shadow, and the stain felt alive, pulsing under her fingers. She hacked at the floorboard, the knife biting into the wood, splinters flying. The shadow roared, its scream shaking the room, and the symbols flared, blinding her. She kept cutting, prying the board loose, revealing a small hollow beneath. Inside was a shard of black stone, smooth and cold, with the same symbol as the key she'd found. She grabbed it, and the shadow screamed louder, its form flickering, shrinking. The stone burned her hand, but she held on, shoving it into her pocket. The ritual wasn't done. She still had to finish the words. Offered the price, but the shadow was weaker now, its eyes dimming. Clara chanted faster, her voice hoarse, sanguis donata, umbra frangita. The circle glowed brighter, the chains snapping tight, and the shadow collapsed into itself, a writhing mass of black that sank into the floor. The room went silent, the whispers gone, the air lighter. Clara fell to her knees, gasping, the knife clattering to the ground. The shard in her pocket was heavy, colder than ice, and she knew it was part of the shadow, part of its power. She'd done it, she'd taken something from it. But the ritual wasn't complete, and the house wasn't done. The walls groaned, and the symbols dimmed, their glow fading to nothing. Clara scrambled to her feet, grabbing the book and diary. The crack in the wall was closing, the stones grinding together. She dove through, her backpack catching on the jagged edges, and stumbled into the cellar. The altar was cracked now, its stains spreading like veins, and the chains were still, too still. She ran up the stairs, the whispers returning, softer but sharper, promising pain. In the foyer, the front door was shut, its symbols dark. She didn't try it, she knew better. Instead, she ran to the bedroom, barricading the door with the dresser. The house was quiet again, but it was watching, waiting. She pulled out the shard, its surface glinting in the dim light. It felt alive, pulsing, faintly, and she wrapped it in a cloth, shoving it into her backpack. The diary and book were her only guides now, and she opened them, searching for the next step. Abigail's notes were clearer now, as if the house was letting her see. "The shard is its heart," she wrote. "Use it in the ritual, but beware it knows you now. It will fight harder, demand more." Clara's stomach twisted. The shard was the key, but it was also a trap, tying her to the shadow. The ritual's final step was in the hidden room, at midnight, with the shard in her blood. She didn't want to think about what that meant, but the knife in her pocket felt heavier, like it was whispering to her. She spent the day preparing, reading the book, memorizing the words. The house was restless, its shadows moving in the corners, its whispers growing louder as the sun set. Clara's hands shook as she sharpened the knife on a stone she'd found, its edge gleaming in the fading light. She didn't know if she could do this, but she had no choice. The shadow was weaker, but it wasn't gone, and it wanted her blood. As night fell, the house came alive. The whispers turned into screams, and the shadows crawled across the walls, forming shapes. Edmund, his throat bleeding. Abigail, her eyes empty, and Clara, her hands stained red. She clutched the shard, its cold burning her skin, and headed for the cellar. The symbols on the door glowed again, brighter, angrier, but she didn't stop. The hidden room was waiting, and so was the shadow. She crawled through the crack, the stones tighter now, cutting her arms. The room was darker, the symbols pulsing like a heartbeat, the chains dangling like nooses. She set the shard on the table, its surface glowing faintly, and began the ritual again, drawing the circle, chanting the words. The shadow appeared, its form smaller but sharper, its eyes locked on her. It didn't scream this time, it waited, hungry, knowing she was close to breaking. Clara's voice shook, but she kept going, the knife ready, the shard pulsing in time with her heart. The house was alive, and it was ready to claim her. Chapter 8. The figure at midnight. Clara stood in the hidden room, the shard of black stone pulsing on the stone table, its faint glow casting jagged shadows across the walls. The air was thick, choking with the smell of blood and damp earth, and the symbols carved into the stone pulsed in time with her heartbeat. The knife in her hand felt alive, its edge gleaming in the red light, and the diary and old book lay open beside the shard, their pages trembling as if afraid. The whispers were a storm now, not just voices but a force, pressing against her mind, screaming her name, Edmund's, Abigail's, and others she didn't know. The shadow was here, its presence a weight that made her bones ache, and midnight was close. The house on Hollow Hill was no longer pretending to be still. The walls groaned, the chains on the walls rattled like bones, and the shadows moved, not just sliding but walking, forming shapes that were almost human but wrong, with arms too long, eyes too bright, mouths that opened too wide. Clara's hands shook as she traced the final symbols from the book, her blood mixing with the chalk, staining the table red. The ritual was almost complete, but the price loomed over her, unspoken but heavy, a life given willingly. She didn't want to think about it, but the knife seemed to whisper, urging her to act. She chanted the words, her voice hoarse, Umbra, Frangita, Sanguis, Donata, break the shadow, offer the blood. The circle glowed, brighter than before, its light pushing the shadows back. But they fought, clawing at the edges, their forms merging into one, the shadow itself, taller than the room, its eyes like burning stars, its mouth a void that swallowed the air. It didn't move, but it watched, its hunger a cold hand around her heart. Clara's knees buckled, but she kept going, the shard pulsing faster, its glow matching the symbol's dot. Then she saw Etat, the stroke of midnight. As the house shuddered, a figure appeared in the corner of the room, not the shadow, but something else, something solid. It was tall, draped in a tattered cloak, its face hidden in darkness, except for 2 white sparks where eyes should be. It stood still, but the air around it rippled, like heat rising from pavement, and the whispers changed, becoming a single voice, low and sharp, saying, "Choose." Clara froze, the knife slipping in her hand. This wasn't in the book, the diary, or Abigail's notes. This was new, and it terrified her. The figure took a step, its feet dragging across the floor, leaving smears of something dark, blood maybe, or something worse. The chains rattled louder, and the symbols flared, their light burning her eyes. Clara's voice faltered, but she forced the words out, chanting faster. Sanguis donator, umbra da frangita. The shard glowed brighter, its pulse shaking the table, and the shadow screamed, its form twisting, shrinking. But the figure didn't flinch. It stepped closer, its cloak brushing the floor, and Clara saw its hands pale, bony, with nails like claws, stained red. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice breaking. The figure didn't answer, but the whispers did, chanting, "The price, the price, the price." Clara's heart pounded as she realized what it was. Not the shadow, but its servant, its messenger, come to collect. The book said the ritual needed blood, a life given willingly, and this thing was here to take it. She gripped the knife, her mind racing. She wasn't ready to die, but the house was closing in, the walls tighter, the air heavier, and the figure was almost upon her. She backed against the table, the shard burning her hand through the cloth. The figure stopped, its head tilting, those white sparks staring into her. "Choose," it said again, its voice like gravel grinding in her skull. Clara's eyes darted to the knife, the shard, the book. She didn't know what to do, but she knew she couldn't stop. She grabbed the shard, its cold searing her skin, and held it up, chanting the final words, "Lux aeterna, umbra vincat," eternal light, bind the shadow. The room exploded in light, the symbols blazing, the circle burning white. The shadow screamed, its form collapsing into a writhing mass, and the figure lunged, its claws reaching for her. Clara swung the knife, not at the figure but at the shard, driving the blade into its surface. It cracked, a sound like breaking bone, and the light surged, swallowing the room. The figure vanished, the shadow's scream cut off, and the whispers stopped, leaving a silence so deep it hurt. Clara fell to her knees, the knife clattering to the floor, the shard in pieces around her. The symbols dimmed, and the chains went still, their stains darker now, like fresh blood. The air was lighter, but the house was watching, waiting. She'd hurt the shadow, maybe even trapped it, but the figure's voice echoed in her mind. Choose. The ritual wasn't done, and the price was still unpaid. She gathered the shard's pieces, their edges sharp, cutting her hands. The book and diary were intact, but their pages were blank now, as if the house had erased them. Clara's stomach twisted. She'd lost her guide, but the shard was her weapon, its pieces still pulsing faintly. She wrapped them in the cloth and stuffed them into her backpack, along with the knife. The hidden room was quiet, but it felt wrong, like a predator playing dead. She crawled back through the crack, the stones scraping her raw, and stumbled into the cellar. The altar was cracked, its stains spreading, and the chains hung limp, but the air was heavy again, the whispers creeping back, softer, slyer. "You can't win," they said. "You're ours." Clara ran up the stairs, the house groaning around her, and barricaded herself in the bedroom. The door shook as she pushed the dresser against it, and the shadows stirred, their shapes forming faces: Edmund, Abigail, and now the figure, its white eyes watching. Clara sat on the bed, the shard's pieces in her lap, their glow faint but alive. She didn't know what the figure was, but it wasn't the shadow, it was something else, something tied to the house, to the ritual. The book was useless now, its pages blank, but the diary had one last entry, written in blood, not ink. The figure comes at midnight. It is the shadow's will, its hand. Give it what it wants, or it will take everything. Clara's hands shook. The figure wanted her life, but she'd fought too hard to give it up. She spent the day searching the house, looking for anything, a clue, a weapon, a way out. The library was empty, its shelves bare, as if the house had swallowed the books. The locked room was gone, the door replaced by a blank wall. The cellar was silent, but the altar's cracks had widened, and the chains were warm to the touch, like they'd been touched by something alive. Clara's hope faded, but she clung to the shard's pieces, their pulse her only comfort. As night fell, The house came alive again. The whispers grew louder, the shadows darker, and the figure's voice echoed in her mind. Choose. Clara knew it would come again, at midnight, to collect the price. She sharpened the knife, her hands bleeding, and prepared for the ritual's final step. The shard was her weapon, but it was also her chain, tying her to the shadow. She didn't know if she could win, but she wouldn't give in. Midnight came, and the house shook, the walls groaning, the shadows screaming. Clara stood in the bedroom, the shard's pieces in one hand, the knife in the other. The figure appeared, not in the hidden room but here, its cloak dragging across the floor, its eyes burning white. Choose, it said, its voice a blade. In her skull, Clara raised the knife, her heart pounding, and made her choice. Chapter 9. The Curse of the Grey Family. Clara stood frozen in the bedroom, the knife trembling in her hand, the broken pieces of the black shard glowing faintly in her other palm. The figure loomed before her, its tattered cloak dragging across the floorboards, leaving streaks of dark wet stains. Its eyes to white sparks in a face of shadow burned into her, and its voice, sharp as broken glass, echoed in her skull. Choose. The house on Hollow Hill pulsed around her, the walls creaking like a living thing, the shadows writhing, forming faces of the dead men, Abigail, and others, their mouths open in silent screams. The whispers were a roar now, chanting, "Give, give, give," and Clara knew what they wanted, her life, her blood, the price to bind the shadow. Her breath came in short gasps, the air thick with the smell of rot and blood. The figure took a step closer, its claws glinting in the dim light, and Clara's heart pounded so hard it hurt. She wasn't ready to die, but the house didn't care. It had taken her great-uncle Edmund, her ancestor Abigail, and countless others, all tied to the curse of the Grey family. The diary's words flashed in her mind. The shadow is old, older than the house, and it feeds on our blood. Clara was the last Grey, and the shadow wanted her to end it. She tightened her grip on the knife, its edge catching the faint glow of the shard's pieces. The ritual from the old book was incomplete, its pages now blank, but she remembered the words. Umbra, frangita, sanguis, donata, break the shadow, offer the blood. The shard was her weapon, its pieces tied to the shadow's power. But the figure was something else, its will, its hand, come to collect. Clara's eyes darted to the dresser barricading the door. It wouldn't hold, not against this. She had to act, now. Stay back, she said, her voice shaking but loud. The figure tilted its head, those white eyes unblinking, and the whispers laughed, a sound that clawed at her ears. She held up the shard's pieces, their glow flaring, and the figure flinched, just for a moment. It was enough. Clara lunged for the floor, scraping the chalk from her pocket across the boards, drawing the circle again, faster, sloppier, her blood smearing the lines. The symbols came next, jagged and uneven, but they glowed, pushing the shadows back. The figure moved, its claws slashing the air, and Clara ducked, the knife slipping in her sweaty hand. She chanted, Umbra frangita, sanguis donata, her voice cracking as the circle flared brighter. The house shook, the walls groaning, the floorboards splitting, and the figure screamed, a sound that tore through her skull. The shadows surged, forming hands, faces, eyes, all reaching for her. But the circle held, its light a barrier. Clara clutched the shard's pieces, their edges cutting her palm, and pressed them to the center of the circle. The figure froze, its cloak rippling, and the whispers changed, not chanting now but pleading, no, no, no. Clara's heart raced. She was close, so close, but the price loomed over her. A life, given willingly. She thought of Edmund, his body broken on the altar. Abigail, her eyes gone, and the town, silent, complicit, letting the Greys pay for their sins. Clara was the last, and the shadow wanted her to finish it. She raised the knife, her hand shaking, and pressed it to her palm, where the shard had already cut her. Blood welled, dripping onto the circle, and the symbols blazed, the light blinding. The figure screamed again, its form flickering, and the shadows collapsed, sinking into the floor. Clara kept chanting, her voice steady now, sanguis donata, umbra vincita, offer the blood, bind the shadow. The shard's pieces glowed, hotter, burning her hand, but she didn't let go. The figure lunged, its claws grazing her arm, cold as ice, but she swung the knife, slashing through its cloak. The room exploded in light, the circle burning white, and the figure vanished. its scream cut off. The shadows retreated, the whispers silenced, and the house went still. The air lighter, cleaner. Clara fell to her knees, gasping, the knife clattering to the floor. The shard's pieces were dark now, their glow gone, but they were warm, like they'd drunk her blood. She'd done it. She'd pushed the shadow back, maybe bound it, but the price wasn't paid. Not yet. The house was quiet, but it was a trick, a pause before the next attack. Clara wrapped the shard's pieces in the cloth, her hands shaking, and stuffed them into her backpack. The diary and book were useless now, their pages blank, but she kept them, hoping for a clue. The floorboards under the circle were scorched, the symbols burned into the wood, and her blood was dry, like the house had taken it. She stood, her legs weak, and moved the dresser, checking the hallway. It was empty, but the shadows lingered, watching. She needed answers, something to explain the figure, the curse, the price. The diary had mentioned the Grey family. There, deal with the shadow, and the town's silence. Clara decided to search the house again, starting with the library. The shelves were bare, but she checked every corner, every crack, looking for anything Edmund or Abigail might have left. The air grew colder as she searched, the whispers creeping back, soft but sharp, like a blade against her skin. In a dusty corner, behind a broken shelf, she found a small box, its wood carved with the same spiral symbol as the shard. Inside was a letter, yellowed and brittle, written in Edmund's handwriting. "To my heir," it began. "If you read this, you're a Grey, and the curse is yours. The shadow came to us centuries ago, when our ancestor built this house on its ground. It promised power, and we gave it blood, our kin, our children, our lives. I tried to break it, to lock it away, but it's too strong. The figure comes at midnight, the shadow's will, to collect the price. Only a Grey can end it, but the cost is everything." Clara's hands trembled as she read. The Grey family had fed the shadow for generations, sacrificing their own to keep it quiet. Edmund had tried to stop it, hiding the book, locking the shard, but he'd failed. Abigail had tried too, and died. Clara was the last, and the figure was here for her. The letter ended with a warning. "The ritual needs a life, given willingly. If you fight, it will take more. If you run, it will follow. The shadow is the house, and the house is you." She folded the letter, her throat tight. The house was part of her, tied to her blood, her name. She couldn't run. The symbols on the door burned her. The windows slammed shut. The figure would come again, at midnight, and she had to be ready. She took the box, the letter, and the shard's pieces, heading back to the bedroom. The house creaked around her, a low, mocking laugh, and the shadows stirred, forming shapes, hands, eyes, the figure's cloak. Clara barricaded the door, her hands bleeding from the shard's edges. She had hours until midnight, hours to find a way to end the curse without dying. The letter said the shadow was the house, and the house was her. Maybe the price wasn't just her life, maybe it was something else, something tied to the Greys. She opened the diary again, searching for clues, but the pages were still blank, except for one line, written in her own handwriting, though she didn't remember writing it. "The shadow lives in you." Her blood ran cold. The house wasn't just alive, it was part of her, and she was part of it. The figure wasn't just the shadow's hand, it was hers, too, a piece of her family's curse, come to claim her. Midnight was coming, and Clara had to choose, give her life, or find another way to break the shadow, to break the house, to break herself. Chapter 10. The ritual in the cellar. Clara sat on the cold floor of the bedroom, her back against the barricaded door, the knife resting in her lap. The shard's pieces, wrapped in cloth, pulsed faintly in her backpack, their warmth seeping through, like a heartbeat. The house on Hollow Hill was silent, but it was a predator silence, coiled and ready to strike. The shadows clung to the walls, their edges sharp, forming shapes, hands, eyes, the figure's tattered cloak that vanished when she looked too long. The diary and old book were blank now, their words gone, but Edmund's letter burned in her mind. "The shadow is the house, and the house is you." Clara was a Grey, the last of her line, and the curse was hers to end or to feed. The clock on the wall, stuck at midnight, ticked once, a sharp snap that made her flinch. It was late, the grey light fading through the cracked windows, and midnight loomed like a blade. The figure would come again, its white eyes demanding the price, a life, given willingly. Clara's hand tightened on the knife, her blood still crusted on its blade from the last ritual. She'd hurt the shadow, cracked its shard, but it wasn't enough. The house was alive, tied to her blood, and the cellar was where it would end one way or another. She opened the diary, hoping for something, anything, but the pages stayed blank except for her own handwriting. The shadow lives in you. Her stomach twisted. The figure wasn't just the shadow's servant, it was part of her, part of the Greys, a piece of the curse that had haunted her family for centuries. The ritual in the hidden room was her last chance, but it needed blood, a life, and Clara wasn't sure she could pay it. Still, she had the shard's pieces, and they were her weapon, her only hope to weaken the shadow before it took her. She stood, her legs shaky, and gathered her things. The knife, the shard's pieces, the chalk, and Edmund's letter. The dresser scraped as she moved it, the sound echoing in the quiet house. The hallway was dark, the air thick with the smell of rot and blood. The whispers started, soft at first, then louder, chanting her name in a voice that wasn't human. "Clara," they hissed, "you're home." She ignored them, her eyes fixed on the cellar door at the end of the foyer. Its symbols glowed red, pulsing like a wound, and the air grew colder with every step. The cellar stairs creaked, each one a warning, and the darkness swallowed her, thicker than before. The symbols on the walls were dim, barely glowing, but they lit her path to the chamber with the stone altar. Its black stains gleamed, spreading like veins, and the chains rattled, though nothing touched them. The crack in the wall, the entrance to the hidden room, was narrower now, the stones jagged, as if the house was trying to keep her out. Clara crawled through, her backpack catching, her arms bleeding from the rough edges. The hidden room was smaller, tighter, the walls closing in like a trap. The symbols glowed brighter, angrier, and the stone table in the center was cracked, its surface wet with something that smelled of blood. The chains hung from the walls, their links stained dark, and the air was so heavy Clara could barely breathe. She knelt by the table, her hands shaking as she pulled out the shards, pieces, the chalk, and the knife. The whispers were a storm now, screaming, "Give, give, give," and the shadows moved, forming the figure's shape, its cloak, its claws, its white eyes watching. Clara drew the circle on the table, her blood mixing with the chalk, the symbols burning her fingers as she traced them. The shards pieces glowed, their pulse matching her heart, and she placed them in the center of the circle, their edges sharp against her skin. She began the ritual, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Umbra, frangita, sanguis donata," she chanted, the words heavy on her tongue. "Break the shadow, offer the blood." The circle flared, its light pushing the shadows back, and the house shook, the walls groaning, the chains rattling like bones. The figure appeared, not in the corner but on the table, its cloak pooling like ink, its eyes burning white. "Choose," it said, its voice a blade in her skull. Clara's hand tightened on the knife, her blood dripping onto the circle, and she kept chanting, louder, faster. The shard's pieces glowed hotter, their light blinding, and the figure screamed, its form flickering. The shadows surged, their shapes twisting Edmund, his throat torn open, Abigail, her eyes gone, and Clara, her body broken, her face not her own. She didn't stop. The ritual was her only weapon, and the shard was the key. She pressed the knife to her palm, cutting deeper, her blood pooling on the table, mixing with the circle's glow. "Sanguis donata, umbra vincita," she said, her voice breaking. "Offer the blood, bind the shadow." The figure lunged, its claws grazing her arm, cold as death, but the circle held, its light a wall. The shard's pieces burned, their glow swallowing the room, and the figure collapsed, its scream cut off, its form sinking into the table. The house roared, the walls cracking, the symbols flaring, then dimming. The chains snapped tight, and the air lightened, the whispers silenced. Clara fell to her knees, gasping, the knife slipping from her hand. The shard's pieces were dark now, their glow gone, but the table was warm, the blood soaking into its cracks. She'd done it, the shadow was bound, or at least weakened, but the figure's voice echoed, "Choose." The price wasn't paid, not fully. Her blood wasn't enough. The room was quiet, but the house was alive, its pulse slower but still. There, Clara gathered the shard's pieces, their edges cutting her hands, and stuffed them into her backpack. The knife was slick with her blood, and she kept it close, its weight a reminder of what was coming. The crack in the wall was open, but the stones seemed to shift, like the house was breathing. She crawled through, her arms raw, and stumbled into the cellar. The altar was shattered now, its stains gone, but the chains were warm, like they'd been touched by something alive. She ran up the stairs, the whispers creeping back, soft but sharp. "You can't leave," they said. "You're ours." The foyer was dark, the front door's symbols dim, but she didn't try it. She knew it wouldn't open. Instead, she returned to the bedroom, barricading the door, her hands shaking as she opened Edmund's letter again. "The shadow is the house, and the house is you," it said. Clara's blood was the key, but it wasn't enough. The ritual needed more life, given willingly, not just blood. She spent the day searching the diary, the letter, anything for a clue. The pages were still blank, but one line appeared, written in Abigail's handwriting. "The curse is in the blood, but the house can be broken. Find the heart." Clara's heart sank. The heart. The shard was part of it, but there was something else, something deeper in the house. She thought of the altar, the chains, the figure's eyes. The heart was in the cellar, in the hidden room, and she had to go back. As night fell, the house came alive again. The whispers grew louder, the shadows darker, forming shapes, hands, claws, the figure's cloak. Clara clutched the knife, the shard's pieces in her pocket, and prepared for midnight. The ritual wasn't done, and the figure would come again, demanding the price. She didn't know if she could pay it, but she knew she couldn't run. The house was her, and she was the house, and the shadow was waiting. Chapter 11. The shadows. Hunger. Clara sat in the bedroom, the knife slick with her blood, its blade glinting in the dim light filtering through the cracked windows. The shard's broken pieces, wrapped in cloth, pulsed faintly in her backpack, their warmth a constant reminder of the shadow's presence. The house on Hollow Hill was quiet, but it was a liar's quiet, the kind that hid teeth. The shadows clung to the walls, their edges sharp, forming shapes, hands, eyes, the figure's tattered cloak that flickered and vanished when she stared. The diary and old book were blank, their words erased, but Abigail's final note burned. In her mind, the curse is in the blood, but the house can be broken. Find the heart. Clara knew the heart was in the cellar, in the hidden room, and she had to face it before midnight. The clock on the wall, stuck at midnight, ticked once, a sharp sound that cut through the silence. It was late, the grey light gone, replaced by a darkness that felt alive. The whispers were back, softer now, but hungrier, chanting her name in a voice that wasn't human. "Clara," they hissed, "feed us." Her hand tightened on the knife, her blood still wet from the last ritual. She'd weakened the shadow, cracked its shard, but the price of life, given willingly, was still unpaid. The figure would come, again, its white eyes demanding her choice, and Clara wasn't sure she could fight it. She stood, her legs trembling, and checked the dresser barricading the door. It wouldn't hold forever, but it was all she had. The shard's pieces, the knife, and Edmund's letter were her only weapons, and she packed them carefully, her hands shaking as she touched the shard's edges. They cut her, even through the cloth, and the pain grounded her, kept her from falling apart. The cellar was calling, its pull like a hook in her chest, and she knew she couldn't wait. The heart was there, and the shadow's hunger was growing. The hallway was a tunnel of shadows, the air thick with the smell of rot and blood. The cellar door loomed at the end of the foyer, its symbols glowing red, pulsing like a heartbeat. Clara's breath caught as she approached, the knife heavy in her hand. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices said, "Edmund, Abigail," others screaming, "Give, give, give." She pushed the door open, and a wave of cold air hit her, smelling of earth and decay. The stairs stretched into the dark, longer than before, each step creaking like a warning. The cellar chamber was a void, the symbols on the walls dim, barely glowing. The stone altar was shattered, its black stain spreading like ink, and the chains rattled, warm to the touch, like something had just held them. The crack in the wall, the entrance to the hidden room, was narrower, the stones jagged, as if the house was trying to keep her out or trap her inside. Clara crawled through, her backpack scraping, her arms bleeding from the rough edges. The whispers followed, a storm now, chanting her name, promising pain. The hidden room was smaller, the walls closer, the symbols glowing brighter, angrier. The stone table was cracked, its surface wet with blood, hers, or something else's. The chains hung from the walls, their links stained dark, and the air was so thick Clara could barely breathe. She knelt by the table, pulling out the shards, pieces, the knife, and the chalk. The ritual was her last chance, but it needed the heart, the shadow's core, and she didn't know where it was. The whispers screamed, "Feed us," and the shadows moved, forming the figure's shape, its cloak, its claws, its white eyes watching. Clara drew the circle on the table, her blood mixing with the chalk, the symbols burning her fingers. The shards' pieces glowed, their pulse matching her heart, and she placed them in the center, their edges cutting her hands. She began the ritual, her voice shaking, "Umbra, frangita, sanguis donata," break the shadow, offer the blood. The circle flared, its light pushing the shadows back, and the house shook, the walls groaning, the chains rattling like bones. The figure appeared, not on the table but behind her, its cloak pooling like oil, its eyes burning into her. "Choose," it said, its voice a blade in her skull. Clara's hand tightened on the knife, her blood dripping onto the circle, and she kept chanting, louder, faster. The shards' pieces glowed hotter, their light blinding, and the figure screamed, its form flickering. The shadows surged, forming shapes. Edmund, his throat torn, Abigail, her eyes gone, and Clara, her body broken, her face not her own. She didn't stop, pressing the knife to her palm, cutting deeper, her blood pooling on the table, mixing with the circles glowed out. Then she saw Ito crack in the table, deeper than the rest, pulsing with a faint red light. The heart. It wasn't a stone or a shard, but something alive, buried in the table's core. Clara's stomach twisted, but she didn't hesitate. She drove the knife into the crack, the blade sinking into something soft, warm, like flesh. The house screamed, a sound that shook her bones, and the symbols flared, blinding her. The figure lunged, its claws grazing her arm, cold as death, but the circle held, its light a wall. Clara kept chanting, "Sanguis donata, umbra vincatu," her voice breaking. "Offer the blood, bind the shadow." The shards' pieces burned, their glow swallowing the room, and the heart pulsed, spilling blood not hers, but something older, darker. The figure screamed, its form collapsing, and the shadows retreated, sinking into the floor. The whispers stopped, the air lightened, and the house went still, its pulse slowing, fading. Clara fell to her knees, gasping, the knife stuck in the table, the shards' pieces dark now, their glow gone. The heart was still, its blood pooling on the table, soaking into the cracks. She'd found it, hurt it, but the price wasn't paid. The figure's voice echoed, "Choose." Her blood wasn't enough, and the ritual wasn't done. The house was weaker, but it was still alive, still hungry. She pulled the knife free, her hands shaking, and gathered the shards' pieces, their edges cutting her again. The table was crumbling, the symbols dimming, and the chains hung limp, their stains fading. Clara crawled through the crack, the stones tighter, scraping her raw, and stumbled into the cellar. The altar was dust now, the chains cold, but the whispers were back, soft, sly, promising more. "You can't win," they said. "You're ours." She ran to the bedroom, barricading the door, her heart pounding. The shards' pieces were heavy, their warmth gone, but they were still part of the shadow, part of the house. She opened Edmund's letter, hoping for answers, but it was blank, like the diary and book. The house was erasing everything, leaving her alone with the truth. The shadow was her, and she was the house. The heart was its power, but it wasn't enough to destroy it. Clara sat on the bed, the knife in her lap, the shards' pieces beside her. Midnight was gone, but another would come, and the figure would return, hungrier, angrier. She had to finish the ritual, pay the price, or find another way. The house creaked, a low mocking laugh, and the shadows stirred, forming shapes, claws, the figure's eyes. Clara's blood was the key, but the shadow wanted more, and it wouldn't stop until it had her. Chapter 12. The final night. Clara huddled in the bedroom, the knife clutched in her bloodied hand, the shards' broken pieces scattered on the bed, their faint pulse barely warm now. The house on Hollow Hill was silent, but it was a cruel silence, like the pause before a scream. The shadows clung to the walls, their edges sharp, forming shapes, hands, eyes, the figure's tattered cloak that flickered and vanished when she looked too long. The diary, the old book, and Edmund's letter were blank, their words erased, leaving only her own scrawled note. "The shadow lives in you." Her blood was the key, the heart in the cellar was its power, but the shadow's hunger was endless. and the price of life, given willingly, was still unpaid. The clock on the wall, stuck at midnight, ticked once, a sharp snap that cut through the dark. It was late, the night thick outside the cracked windows, and Clara knew this was it, the final night. The figure would come again, its white eyes demanding her choice, and the house would not let her run. The whispers were soft now, but sharp, slicing into her thoughts. "Clara," they hissed, "you're home." Her hand tightened on the knife, her blood crusted on its blade from the last ritual. She'd hurt the shadow, cracked its heart, but it wasn't enough. The house was her, and she was the house, and the curse of the Grey family was hers to end. She stood, her legs shaking, and checked the dresser barricading the door. It was heavy, but it wouldn't hold forever. The shards pieces, the knife, and her own blood were all she had left. The heart in the cellar was the shadow's core, and she'd struck it, spilling its blood. But the ritual was incomplete. Abigail's warning echoed, "The curse is in the blood, but the house can be broken." Clara didn't know how, but she knew where, back in the hidden room where the shadow was strongest, where it would make its final stand. She moved the dresser, the scrape echoing in the quiet, and stepped into the hallway. The air was thick, smelling of rot and blood, and the shadows moved, forming faces. Edmund, his throat torn. Abigail, her eyes gone, and Clara, her body broken, her face not her own. The whispers grew louder, chanting, "Give, give, give." As she walked to the cellar door, its symbols glowed red, pulsing like a wound, and the air grew colder, biting her skin. She pushed it open, and the darkness swallowed her, the stairs stretching into a void. The cellar chamber was a ruin, the stone altar dust, the chains limp and cold. The crack in the wall, the entrance to the hidden room, was barely wide enough now, the stones jagged, as if the house was closing its jaws. Clara crawled through, her backpack catching, her arms bleeding, the shards pieces heavy in her pocket. The hidden room was smaller, the walls tight, the symbols glowing brighter, angrier, their red light pulsing like a heartbeat. The stone table was crumbling, its surface wet with blood. Hers, the shadows, the houses, the chains hung like nooses, their stains dark, and the air was so thick she could barely breathe. Clara knelt by the table, her hands trembling as she pulled out the shards pieces and the knife. The whispers were a storm now, screaming her name, and the shadows moved, forming the figure's shape, its cloak, its claws, its white eyes watching. She drew the circle on the table, her blood mixing with the dust, the symbols burning her fingers. The shards pieces glowed faintly, their pulse weak, and she placed them in the center, their edges cutting her hands. She began the ritual, her voice hoarse. "Umbra frangita, sanguis donata." Break the shadow, offer the blood. The circle flared, its light pushing the shadows back, and the house shook, the walls cracking, the chains rattling. The figure appeared, not on the table but all around her, its cloak filling the room, its eyes burning white. "Clues," it said, its voice a blade in her skull. Clara's hand tightened on the knife, her blood dripping onto the circle, and she kept chanting, louder, faster. The shards pieces glowed hotter, their light blinding, and the figure screamed, its form flickering. The shadows surged, forming shapes: Edmund, Abigail, and Clara, her body broken, her eyes glowing white. She didn't stop. The ritual was her last chance, and the heart was the key. She pressed the knife to her palm, cutting deeper, her blood pooling on the table, mixing with the circle's glow. "Sanguis donata, umbra vincita," she said, her voice breaking. "Offer the blood, bind the shadow." The figure lunged, its claws grazing her arm, cold as death, but the circle held, its light a wall. Clara grabbed the shards pieces, their edges slicing her hands, and drove them into the table's crack, where the heart had bled. The house screamed, a sound that shook her bones, and the symbols flared, blinding her. The figure collapsed, its scream cut off, and the shadows retreated, sinking into the walls. The whispers stopped, the air lightened, and the table crumbled, the shards pieces dissolving into dust. Clara fell to her knees, gasping, the knife slipping from her hand. The heart was gone, the shadow bound, but the price was still unpaid. The figure's voice echoed, "Choose." The room was quiet, but the house was alive, its pulse faint but there. Clara's blood was everywhere, soaking the table, the floor, the walls. She'd given it, but not enough, not her life, not willingly. The chains hung still, their stains fading, and the symbols dimmed, their glow gone. She crawled through the crack, the stones scraping her raw, and stumbled into the cellar. The chamber was empty, the altar dust, the chains cold. The house was weaker, but it wasn't done. She ran to the foyer, the front door in sight. Its symbols, dark now, lifeless. She touched the handle, expecting it to burn, but it was cold, heavy. She turned it, and the door opened, the night air rushing in, clean and sharp. Clara stepped outside, her legs shaking, the knife still in her hand. The house was silent behind her, its shadows still, but she felt its eyes, watching, waiting. She walked to the village, the path muddy, the trees silent. Blackthorn was empty, its streets dark, the old men gone, the librarian's windows black. Clara didn't stop. She kept walking, the shards dust in her pocket, the knife heavy in her hand. The shadow was bound, but the house was still there, tied to her blood, her name. She was the last Grey, and the curse was hers, but she'd chosen to live, to fight, to walk away. The road stretched ahead, the night endless, and Clara kept moving, the whispers gone but their echo in her mind. The house on Hollow Hill stood, behind her, silent, waiting for another Grey, another night, another price.